Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and I might just mention that we're on the road. We're in Birmingham, Alabama today, and we want to thank everybody at WGIB, and Paul Hancock will be with us later next hour as we will talk with him about the radio station and something else which is kind of unique. We're broadcasting right now from the television studio, so anybody in Birmingham could watch us on Channel 47. We're used to having microphones in the studio, so that's not anything new, but another way to actually partake. So again, you can watch the program on that particular channel on television. Of course, you can listen to it on Point of View, and of course, you can see it on Facebook and a variety of other places. So this hour, we're going to focus on a book that will be coming out in the fall. And then next hour, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. And those are many, as you might imagine. We're talking about everything from a mask mandate to a vaccine mandate to all sorts of very interesting things coming down right now about tech censorship, and even how to, maybe in a more effective way, argue against critical race theory in some of the issues that we've been talking about here on Point of View. So those are all topics we will address next hour. And even though we're on the road because of this very good technology, we will be able to take phone calls. So as we talk with our guest, Dr. Alan Noble, if you have a comment or a question, you're free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. And next hour, when we talk about a mandated vaccine requirement and all sorts of other topics, I would suspect many of you might have some comments, and so we will take those phone calls to give you a chance to join the conversation. But let me, if I can, introduce our guest, and his name I've already mentioned is Dr. Alan Noble. Holds a Ph.D. from Baylor University and serves as the assistant professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. He's also the co-founder and even editor-in-chief of what's called Christ and Pop Culture. You may have seen some of his articles. They've appeared in Atlantic, Vox, BuzzFeed, the Gospel Coalition, Christianity Today, and First Things, to mention just a few. This book is not out quite yet, but we wanted to give you an advanced look. It has the very good and biblical title, You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. 7 chapters, which we'll be talking about. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read more about that, we have information about it on our website, which is pointofview.net. We have a link to some of the material that he has put together, so you can simply scroll down to Dr. Alan Noble, click on that button, and it will take you to his website, in which you can pre-order the book and also get some other information about him, because you perhaps would like to have him come and speak. And so, first of all, we need to get into the interview, but then also a little bit later, give you a chance to join the conversation. So, Dr. Alan Noble, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm in Birmingham. I think you're in another part of the country, but we have connected together electronically. And let me take the subtitle of your book first, and that is what is in your introduction, An Inhuman Culture. I think anybody listening to Point of View recognizes that that is the case. I mean, we're not just talking about the things that we always identify as inhuman, like war, terrorism, and those kinds of things, but even the polarization, the way we treat each other, and just a whole series of things that have unfolded before our very eyes and cause us to almost wish for some kind of utopia, knowing full well that that is not exactly the world that we find ourselves in. And I get the sense after reading through your book that that's the reason you wrote the book in the first place, to recognize that these are ongoing problems and these are issues that need to be addressed, but in many cases our secular culture is not giving us, obviously, biblical answers. What are your thoughts?
That's right. Yeah. So these are the issues that I'm trying to describe when I argue that we live in an inhuman society. They go from everything from little tiny inconveniences that I do think add up to create a feeling of being overwhelmed with minutia, with bureaucracy, let's say. So for me, one of the things I think of is doing taxes. There's something dehumanizing about our tax system, the complexity, the Kafkaesque absurdity of it, right? And as a Christian who desires to give unto Caesar what's Caesar's, I almost feel like it's incapable to accurately do my taxes because it is so obscenely complicated. Well, but that's a little tiny thing. Okay, sure. But as you said, like it runs the gamut from things like that all the way up to these larger issues. Now, secular society offers us solutions. There are a lot of solutions offered within the church too. The church often has the perspective that if we, win back the culture, then we'll be able to adjust these things. And part of the argument of the book is that Christians are called to live in this tension. On the one hand, we don't get to say the problems in our society are going to be here because of the fall, so we just need to do what our jobs are and just never mind this. No, if you see injustice, you are tasked to honor God, to love your neighbor, to do what you can in your limited capacity to correct that. On the other hand, you do not get to put yourself in the role of Christ, in the role of God, and imagine that you are saving society, that you have the grand plan that is finally going to fix everything, or even just fix one problem. Like this is going to be the answer. And so living in that tension, it's not easy, but I do believe that it's what we're biblically called to do.
Sure. And again, I think the point that you are making, and it's one that we've talked about so often, is it comes from a number of sources. And even if tomorrow we could wave a wand and have nothing but born-again Christians in all political environments and all business and all the rest, we're still having to deal with technocracy, as you call it, consumerism, which is one of the chapters of my book, more recently, and most importantly, individualism. And if I can pick out one that surfaces time and time again in your book, it is that, because there are always problems with individuals, but there is a sense in which all around the world, of course, people are selfish and people are individuals, but there is something unique about kind of North American Christianity where we really do focus on the self, and that really shows up quite a bit in your analysis of what's taking place in our culture, isn't it?
Yeah, so at the root, I'm not trying to make a direct, simple monocausal argument saying that individualism is causing all these problems, but I do think that ideologically at the root of so much of the dehumanization that I'm talking about, that I'm describing in the culture that we live in, comes from what I call a false understanding of what it means to be human. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because societies are always designed based on some idea of what it means to be a human being. What do humans need to do? Do they need to work? Do they have families? Do they live together? Do they live separately? So on and so forth. So you have to have some idea, some vision of what it means to be human. Well, what if that vision is wrong? What if it's not actually the anthropology that God gave us, how God actually designed us? Well, then you should expect to find tension and depression and anxiety and all these conflicts. And I think that's what we're having. Now,
let me jump in real quickly because we have one of those mandatory breaks, and I know you have some things to say about kind of this biblical anthropology, which is key, but we have, of course, our first break, and we are talking, by the way, today about this new book coming out, You Are Not Your Own. Dr. Alan Noble with us, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. We'll continue that conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Americans seem to be of two minds when polled about the current administration and the future of this country. For example, the Harvard-Harris poll reported a very high approval rating for President Biden and his administration. On the other hand, if you dig into the specifics, you find that Americans are very concerned about some of the administration policies and the direction of this nation. Let's look at two issues that both start with the letter I. That would be immigration and inflation. The administration has tried to downplay and even ignore these issues, and the mainstream media has been willing to ignore these issues. 8 out of 10 voters say that illegal immigration is either a very serious or somewhat serious issue. Also, a large majority correctly answered that the number of monthly immigrant crossings have increased since Biden took office. It's also worth noting that voters significantly underestimated the number of new illegal immigrants coming into this country. This underestimate is probably due to the lack of media coverage of the crisis at the border. 2/3 believe that the Biden administration executive orders on immigration actually encourage illegal immigrants, and a majority also believe that the current administration should have left the Trump administration policies in place. When voters were asked about inflation, they were more concerned administration. A significant majority said that they were either very concerned or somewhat concerned about inflation. They may not understand all the economic issues, but they can see the prices of everything increasing even while being assured that there isn't a problem. Americans may be of two minds. They are willing to give a high approval rating, but they also expect something to be done with some of these important issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, spending some time today talking about the book You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Dr. Alan Noble with us. And Dr. Noble, really, in a sense, what you're talking about is kind of a skewed anthropology, a unbiblical view of human nature, and that shows up in some of your chapters on I am my own and belong to myself, how society helps you to be your own. There is a lot in our culture that is causing you to focus on yourself, and in some respects, if we want to recapture what Christ has called for us to be, we need to start with the assumption of the title of your book, that you are not your own. True?
Yes, yeah. So that's the argument, is that the false anthropology that our society promotes, and it's built into our consumerism, our politics, our laws, our values, our ideology, our aesthetics. It's almost everywhere. It's in the church as well. Is this idea that you are fundamentally, basically, your own and you belong to yourself. And from that premise, I think all kinds of problems stem. But one of the biggest problems is that the responsibilities that are put on your shoulders when you try to belong to yourself are utterly unmanageable, because you're not meant to carry those, because you actually belong to someone else. You belong to Christ. And so it is a call for the church to do what it can to practice and live out this idea of belonging to Christ, and therefore belonging to the church, belonging to our families, belonging to creation, belonging to our communities, not in the same way we belong to God, obviously, but there are duties and obligations we have to those things that we wouldn't have if we just say, I'm my own, I can do whatever I want. I can leave my family or community or church or whatever and go someplace where, I'm happier. That doesn't work for us. We don't get to do that.
You know, I was just thinking, Dr. Noble, that I have not probably heard too many sermons where the pastor from the pulpit addresses this issue, and yet this is really key. And if you think about that in Colossians 2:8, it's talking about the fact that we should not be taken captive by false philosophy. And yet chapter 2, you talk about how society provides justification, how society provides identities, how society really gives us meanings, how even society gives us values. So we are going to have to, living in this culture, be very counterculture. And I think we need to be warned from our church leaders, our pastors, our Sunday school teachers, and others not to go out there and be like the world, but to actually be different than the world. And it does seem to me that there are just so many forces in society really telling you that you are your own and you do have to take care of yourself and you'd have no responsibility other than to your own self.
Yes, yeah, and it is a countercultural idea, and I think it'll be difficult for people to unroot because we are very comfortable with it, and society again teaches it to us in lots of different ways. But it's important. It's incredibly important, and yeah, I don't think pastors maybe don't commonly preach about it. Sometimes we'll talk about individualism. I've heard pastors talk more about individualism. But what I'm trying to describe here goes beyond. Sometimes when we talk about individualism, we contrast it with collectivism, and it focuses on sort of this political conversation. And the political is part of the argument, but I want to say it's much deeper than this idea of, collectivism versus individualism. No. It goes down to the way we understand our, again, like you said, justification in the world. How does society give us tools to justify ourselves? And as I try to argue in the book, they're very much like the gods of old, the Greek gods that St. Augustine wrote about in the City of God. He said, look, you have these gods who promise you all these things, but look how they have always failed you. They never do what they promise. And that's the same thing with the way society promises to give us justification, meaning, value, belonging, identity, so on and so forth. They always let us down.
One of the other things you talk about is how society fails us. Part of the issue, and it surfaces in your book as well, because you give us kind of this list of all the things that we probably in our heart of hearts know is not a good idea. For example, staring at a screen 15 hours a day and not objectifying people, but still looking at sexually explicit pictures and on and on and on. It seems to me that there is maybe even a recognition on the part of some non-Christians that some of the things that we do are not healthy and not helpful, but we always go to them because they're sort of enticing and they're making a promise, kind of like you said, like the Greek gods, that they really can't fulfill.
And very often, I think people turn to these things like pornography or binge watching TV shows for 15 hours, whatever it might be, drugs, alcohol, any number of things. It could be any number of things. These coping mechanisms, because when you live in an inhuman society, it's going to be overwhelming. And the example I try to get is that, when you see certain animals in the zoo that have something called zoochosis, which is where an animal that's not meant to be caged is walking in circles for hours on end because they feel sick. Like they recognize, this is not my environment. This is not working for me. Even though it's specifically designed for that animal, it really doesn't work. And so I think that's part of what's going on for us. And I think that's important to note because it allows us to have grace for each other, and it allows us to have grace for non-Christians who turn to some of these things. Well, one of the reasons they're turning to it is that all of society is treating them as in dehumanizing ways, and so they're trying to cope. Is it healthy? No, but you understand it, and now that can allow you to offer something better, truer.
I loved how you opened one of the chapters about zoochosis. Never heard about that before, but anybody who's ever been to a zoo recognizes, for example, you see the lions pacing back and forth, and as much as the experts in the zoo exhibit are trying to make it as much like the African plain, even though the lion may not exactly know what's missing, he or she knows something isn't quite right, and they pace back and forth. And so you do you go through a long list of, self-checkout is maybe a little more efficient, but it's at the cost of any kind of human interaction. Of course, we mentioned objectifying the human body is degrading, but we still can't stop people from viewing pornography. Of course, the one I just used a minute ago, the issue, we recognize that staring into a screen 15 hours a day is probably not good, but we do it anyway. And just a whole series of others, filling our days with tedious labor, actually then soothed by entertainment, which sometimes actually is fairly boring. You go through this long list of where, in some respects, we're kind of like the lion pacing around. We know something's wrong, and just like the lion maybe doesn't know what's wrong, but he knows that what he's in, the environments he's in right now, is not working. I think a lot of human beings, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, say, this isn't exactly what I expected it to be like in the 21st century.
Absolutely, yes. And so part of the design, and I don't know if I pulled this off, but one of the things I very intentionally tried to do in writing this book, particularly the first half, is write it in such a way that you can give it to people who are Christian and non-Christian alike. And hopefully my desire is that they will resonate with some of the problems that I'm describing. They'll see themselves in it and recognize, oh, yes, I feel this dehumanization as well. You know what? I ignore it because I don't know that there's anything I can do about it, but this isn't right. This isn't appropriate for us to be treated in this way. And so my hope is that by making this argument that resonates with people, because I think it is true, I genuinely do, I can open them up and allow them to see, well, okay, if belonging to ourselves is at the root of so much of this, what if we belong to someone else? What would that look like? Who would we belong to, and how would that make a difference? That really is the goal of the book.
Well, let's, again, then when we come back, begin to address that. We were going to talk about the fact that we might ask ourselves a question. What is your only comfort in life and death? And we may begin to say, okay, we've identified the problem. We've got a very good diagnosis. What's your prescription? And that takes us into the next part of the book. And certainly, I think you can already sense where this is going by the title of the book, You Are Not Your Own. And so if you find yourself saying, well, I'm kind of interested in this, even though the book is not out, we do have a link to Alan Noble's website, so you can go there. And, of course, if you'd want to reorder it, you can do that and get it in the future. Of course, there is other material there as well, so you might want to get some of his writings, maybe even contact him if you find yourself saying, this might be something we would like to cover in a conference or at a church event or something of that nature. So we are going to give you all sorts of opportunities here to join with this, and we are going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to spend a little bit of time getting into these very important issues today as we cover these topics right here on Point of View. So we need to take a break, and if you'd like to join the conversation today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. More importantly, also have some great material that we've posted here today, which we'll get into in the next hour. What about these vaccine mandates? What about tech censorship? Are there some better ways to address the issue of critical race theory? We'll talk about that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, broadcasting from Birmingham, Alabama today. It's the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and we still have with us Dr. Alan Noble. Next hour, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. Also want to spend just a few minutes talking with the station manager at WGIB here in Birmingham. Just as a program note, tomorrow we will be in Tupelo, Mississippi, and we'll be at the headquarters of the American Family Radio, and that's going to be a great opportunity as well. And we are, of course, joined today by Dr. Alan Noble as we talk about his book, You Are Not Your Own. And Alan, just for a minute, I might just mention that you do talk about the fact that you don't write this book as a critic positioned safely outside of society, but very much a product of someone living within that society, affected by the same problems, tempted by the same desires, burdened by the same anxieties. And as I like to say, all of us doing programs like this and writing books are fellow travelers. So I think that disclaimer should be obvious, but I thought we'd put it on the table because now I think some people might be saying, okay, you've given us a pretty good diagnosis of what is going wrong in this culture, and it is in many ways an inhuman world. Then what can the Christian view and what can this idea that we are going to be talking about in terms of finding comfort and how that can actually begin to break some of the hold that this secular culture has on our mindset? So how do we begin to navigate this as Christians?
It's a great question. So I spend the second half of the book trying to tease that out because it's not easy. I mean, if my argument is correct in the first half that these problems are deeply rooted and they're systemic and they're inside of us and they're all over, then there's no switch we can flip to solve the problem. I want to point out, that first question and answer in the Heidelberg Catechism, what is your only comfort in life and death? I just find that so, comforting that it begins, the Heidelberg Catechism, which is trying to explain these essential biblical doctrines, it begins with this fact that, most people don't feel comfort, and they need to. And where are they going to look for that comfort? They need an answer. And that is, the Catechism says that we are not our own, but belong to Christ. Now, something you mentioned quite a bit earlier, you were talking about the importance of pastors preaching and bringing up some of these issues from the pulpit. And one thing that can do, and one thing I hope the book can do, is provide us some vocabulary and some explanation, a way of understanding some of the lies that we're being told. Because if you don't know the nature of the lies, if you don't know where they're coming from or what they look like, you can't resist them. If you don't have the tools or the capacity to resist them, you're just going to be consumed by them. And so part of my hope is by offering this diagnosis, explaining how it works, explaining how our identity fits with this, it will equip people with the ability to say, okay, I know why I am feeling bad right now, because society tells me that my career defines my identity, and if I don't have a successful career, then my life is worthless. But I know that's a lie, and I know where that lie is coming from. And I think that's the place we begin, is understanding the problem and equipping ourselves with the language to reject it and replace it with what we know to be true, which is that our lives, our individual lives, particularly as believers, are meaningful and valuable because of Christ's work on the cross, not because of our efforts. So that's the place we begin.
Let me, if I can, just mention that if you'd like to join the conversation this hour, maybe ask a question, make a comment, let's open up the phones. We've got one phone call already, which we may get to later. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. And you mentioned the catechism. I thought we'd come back to that for just a minute. Even this morning, we were meeting with one of the donors here in Birmingham and talked about the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. Well, this is a German catechism going all the way back to Heidelberg University. identity, and you decided to actually spend the better part of one whole page listing it. I dare say most of our listeners are not familiar with that. Even if they're German Lutherans, they probably are still going, well, that one we don't say very often. But you've used that to illustrate how we can begin to think about the fact that we're not our own, but that we belong to Christ. Can you kind of fill that out for us?
Yes. So even though this is over 500 years old, I think it was designed to explain, as I said earlier, these essential church doctrines. And I think it has always been the case and always will be the case until Christ comes again, that humans need comfort both in life, because life is incredibly difficult and you will suffer a lot. You just will. But you also need comfort in death, because facing death, the shadow of death, the valley of the shadow of death is terrifying. You need a comfort for those things. Now, the real comfort is in Christ, and knowing that he is the one who justifies and preserves and gives you breath while you live, and he's the one who cares for you after you die. He's the one, not yourself. So I think that's it provides language. And the reason I ended up writing about it was that I don't even remember what the particular issue was, but it was some item in the news that had to do some social ill, take your pick. I don't even remember what it was, but I thought to myself, look, at the heart of this is this idea that each of us just belongs to ourselves. And that's why we can justify doing this, acting cruelly to each other. And I thought, boy, the Heidelberg Catechism contradicts this. And it occurred to me that first question and answer, if the church can learn to embrace and live out that idea of belonging to Christ, that's what's going to help us survive this modern world, modernity, because the modern world is telling us the opposite. So that's why I turned to it.
One of the things that you also talk about is how should it change things, and you talk about it would change our justification before God. It would change our identity before God. So some people might say, well, okay, if I adopt that, what's the change? And you go into that in some detail.
Yeah, and I've heard for many years this language of finding your identity in Christ, which I think can be used in a helpful way. But the modern idea of identity is not very clear, and in fact, I don't think it's very biblical. It has a lot more to do with self-expression and branding than it has to do with personhood, which is, I think, a more Christian concept. So when we think about this need to have an identity, often it is driven by these secular pressures to be someone, to be definable. But if we are in union with Christ, which is a biblical truth, if you are saved, you are in union with Christ. God sees you. You're always standing before God. There is someone who knows you perfectly well, who knows your name and your face, and to him, there's never any ambiguity about who you are, because that secular desire to create an identity, which is rampant everywhere in the church, outside the church, it comes from this feeling of inadequacy. You feel like, I don't know exactly who I am. Who am I? What defines me? And so we're desperately trying to express ourselves to cobble something together. And the answer is, no, that's not actually how personhood, which is what you're getting at with identity, works. You're standing before God, and to him, there's no ambiguity. He knows who you are. So you don't have to do this. You don't have to be running around like crazy trying to become someone. You can stand before God because of Christ's work.
One of the other things we'll say just before we go to a break here is that you have come to one of the latter chapters and say, you would expect at this point in the book for me to introduce 5 steps for changing your life by accepting that you are not your own. But I love this. But this is a work of nonfiction. Now, let's face it, all of us would like to have some steps, and you're not going to necessarily take it down that road. But I thought maybe when we come back from the break, you can give us a little bit of what does that look like. And then before we close, I want to talk about what's on your website, because you are writing on all sorts of issues, including these issues. And if people wanted to follow you, interact with you, if people maybe wanted to come and have you come and speak when this book comes out in the fall, I just wanted to provide that opportunity as well. So just a lot of great resources that we have. And if you go to the website right now, you'll see a picture of Dr. Alan Noble, and you can click on the button there and it will take you to his website. Very easy to find. And then you will see that there is information about him, about his writing, some videos that you can see speaking, and then also where you could pre-order the book. Of course, we have information about that on our website as well. And so if you wanted to read a little bit more about the book and actually see some of the endorsements from a number of people that, of course, been on the program with us in the past, I think you're going to find that really captivating and a reason for you to maybe want to get a copy of the book. And if you don't, at least you can find a way to connect with him, follow him on the blog, and much more. So let's take a break. We're not going to come back with 5 steps for changing your life, but we are going to maybe try to give you a little bit of a sense of what that looks like and continue that conversation today. Privileged to have with us just a little bit longer Dr. Alan Noble, and his book is entitled You Are Not Your Own. It is a book coming out in the fall, and we will come back and continue our conversation with him right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we continue our conversation today with Dr. Alan Noble. Since I'm in a TV studio, let me hold up a copy of the book, or actually it is what is called an uncorrected author's copy proof, but to give you a little bit of an idea of what the book looks like. And if you would like to see more about that, you can go to our website, which is pointofview.net, and what you'll find is some great material there by Dr. Noble, as well as information about the book in case you would like to order it. As I've said before, as you look down the list of people that have endorsed the book, most of them have been on Point of View. They're the kind of people we talk to on a regular basis. And so, Alan, for just a minute, I know we're not going to get the 5 things you need to do in order to turn your life around. But if I can even read that last chapter of what we can do, there is a couple starting points that come to mind. One is grace, and the other is humility, the palms upward. And so talk about that, because that's a starting point if we really want to be living counterculture and not being conformed to this world, but by the transforming of the mind of Christ in our lives.
So, Grace, I mentioned this a little bit earlier when I was talking about coping mechanisms, but if we accept the premise that we're living in an environment that was not designed for us as God created us, then we need to have grace for each other. We need to, and that doesn't mean that we overlook sin or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that we should recognize that life is very difficult, and we should be willing to have grace for each other, be kind to each other, encourage each other. And it should also, for Christians who are witnessing to people in the world, it should create some humility, because this world is also really difficult for us. I mentioned earlier before the break that equipping yourself with the language to recognize the lies is very powerful. But you know what? Society is still going to treat you in dehumanizing ways, and you're still going to have to bear that burden. It's not going to magically go away. That's not how things work. It's still going to be difficult, and you're still going to have to persevere. So recognizing that as Christians, I think should create in us a desire for grace for non-Christians, and also a point of contact where we can help them understand what's going on and invite them to consider other things. Now, with humility, we also talked about this briefly earlier, that we are so tempted to come up with the answer for any specific social problem. I do this myself all the time. Any political problem, whatever, we want to have the answer. And I'm not saying that we can't think of these things and we can't imagine them and use our reason God has given us. But we also need to be humble. We need to recognize that our city, our society is so fallen, it's really God that can save this city. It's God that can save it, not us. And so what we have to do is we have to, on one hand, be faithful to display God and his grace and love and his call to repentance in the midst of this society, while also hoping and desiring that he will create the change that only he can do. Because we are not superhuman. We can't save the world. That's not our job. We should not try.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls, and let's head out to Georgia first. Shelby, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Dr. Alan Noble. Do we have her on the air?
Up to top.
There
Can you hear me?
I certainly can. Well, I guess we lost her.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Shelby. One thing are you there?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
I'm getting messed up. I got the radio going and I messed up. Sorry. The idea is, one day somebody came up to me and just wanted to pray for me. It's a compassion and love we need to have for each other, whether we're Christian or not, to touch each other in loving ways. And that's how we get holy and sanctified by the Lord with his glory, working with each other and helping each other and giving each other a hand up and not a push down.
That is good. If I can, Alan, let's talk about that, because there's another aspect. You know, when we talk about individualism, we need to be in community, and we all need each other, because the body of Christ needs all the gifts, and we need to not only be gracious and humble in our own attitude, but gracious and humble and loving and accountable to each other believer in the body of Christ. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I think, so here's one of the areas where I think about, okay, where is the church adopted views, false anthropology? And one of these areas has to do with community and commitment to local church, commitment to family, commitment to place. I think that's important, and commitment to community. So as an example, I think it's very common for Christian young people when they go to college to have been trained to think that when they graduate, they have the entire world as a possibility, you know, to go find a job, any job they want, any place in the world they want, where it's actually uncommon for them to say, okay, what obligations do I have to go back to my hometown? Mm-hmm. What does my home community need? What do my parents, should I move away from my family? I mean, sometimes we might think about that, but not enough. Now, these are burdens, right? I mean, these aren't easy things. It's not, you know, I work in academia. If I want to get a better job, I'd have to be able to move across country. That's just the way it works. Maybe even across the world. But this is where I live. This is where my parents live. And so this is where I am. Now, from a secular perspective, you are your own perspective, I should be following my career goals. And that means not being tied down by family, by place, by community. But that's not what Christians get to do. And so it's going to be uncomfortable at times. You're going to have to be able to set aside your preferences and pursue the interests of others, again, in your family, in your church, in your neighborhood, and in various ways. But it's so important. It's so important because that caller said, we need that community. We need it.
Let me, just before we let you go, talk about the fact that, as you said, you are at Oklahoma Baptist University. And almost every time, Alan, that I interview somebody who is, whether they're at Biola or Cedarville or Liberty or whatever, I just encourage young people to consider a Christian education. And if you have somebody that would love to study English under you at Oklahoma Baptist, talk about the program there and what might be available to some of these young people trying to consider what they might want to do in the future.
I considered it a blessing to be able to teach young Christians. College is such a pivotal time in your life, and the pressure right now that all young people are under is it's inhuman. It's part of that, actually. It's part of this, what inspired this book, because what I see students going through is difficult. It's too much. And so part of what I get to do, and I'm thankful, is I'm in the classroom, I'm mentoring and using literature to help students understand God's world and how other people have interpreted that and what God has to say about that and how to read and discuss things with people better and more effectively. But also in office hours, I devote myself a lot to spending time with students and helping them think through these things, because that's often what young people need is, because it's hard.
Yeah. Well, again, we're just about out of time. Let me just mention one last time. The book's not out yet, but you can pre-order it, and we have a link to Alan Noble's website. It is You Are Not Your Own, and I think you will certainly enjoy the conversation that we've had today with him, and it was going to be out shortly, so I just wanted you to know it's an InterVarsity Press book. Look for it in your local bookstore, and you can pre-order it, and if you'd like to contact him, you can do so, and all that information is at our website, pointofview.net. Dr. Alan Noble, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, all the things that we do need to talk about, all the issues in the news. Hopefully we'll apply the mind of Christ to it, and all that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour on a Wednesday edition of Point of View, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news, but I thought I would also mention very quickly that we are broadcasting today from Birmingham, Alabama, WGIB. And I thought it would be good for just a few minutes, if we could, to talk with the station manager, Paul Hancock. And he has been so gracious. We always appreciate the hospitality that we have from so many of the radio stations that carry this program. And if you knew what it took behind the scenes to do these remote broadcasts, you would certainly have a great appreciation for those individuals who we've partnered with for many years to bring this broadcast. So, Paul, first of all, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
So glad to be here with you, Kerby, and have you in our studio and have you as part of the family, because you are part of the family and that you come and visit with us every afternoon. So we appreciate that.
I might just mention that you've been here about 8 years, and so we never can quite get the exact number of years that Point of View has been on WGIB, but it was here before you got here, wasn't it?
It was. It was founded in 1984, and so we're about 38 years into the broadcasting on this radio station, and then Way TV is part of the ministry as well, and it began in the 90s, and so we have understood from those in the studio that there are folks that remember Brother Marlon Maddox, who hosted Point of View, and so that goes back to I think the late 80s when Point of View came to WGIB.
Well, again, I got involved with Marlon in 1980, I think it was, and then as a guest host in 1986, and then a co-host, and now, of course, the host of Point of View. And I thought for just a minute, because we do have listeners all over Alabama, but WGIB has a number of stations and translators, and it covers quite a bit of region, doesn't it?
It covers the metro area of Birmingham, and so we have 4 translators that cover surrounding cities, east, south, north, and west. We reach as far as Tuscaloosa, where the University of Alabama is, and we have broadcast through these translators that help these areas pick up the programs.
And I've also learned that when I come here, I don't talk about Alabama or Auburn and who I favor, although I've spoken to both universities, so I know what that is. I thought just for an interest before I let you go is that as you do this broadcast, you also have a place here or there that actually can't hear the radio program because of the mountains. And so some of you in other parts of the country listening to this right now might find this interesting. We're actually doing the broadcast today from your TV studio, and there are actually people that actually turn on the television to listen to the radio. Is that right?
That's correct. Our local over-the-air station, Way TV, is on Channel 47. And when digital came, we were able to have 2 sub-channel on that station. So we have our WGIB audio streaming 24/7 with nature video showing on 47 too,
yes,
as well as on Roku. Folks listen that way as well. So it's a wonderful thing that we can have access to people's homes wherever they are via the internet.
Well, and I just thought before I let you go, I also might mention something else. We have our, of course, listeners in South Carolina and Georgia. You actually, before you came here, spent an enormous amount of time. What was it, Bob Jones University?
Bob Jones University. I was in the production department of audio and produced radio programming, but it wasn't until I came to WGIB that I was actually frontline with our listeners and being able to communicate with listeners. And we are listener supported, so we keep in contact with them, and we pray for our listeners as well as they send us prayer requests.
Well, Paul, again, I wanted to say thank you for your hospitality. And for those of you that are actually listening there in Alabama, let me encourage you to support WGIB. As we said before, we can't do it without the partnership that we have here. Of course, we're listener supported. Your particular station is as well. And it's just been great to have you on the program with us for a few minutes.
Great to have you with us, and we hope you'll come again.
We are going to spend just a little bit of time today talking about some of those issues. And one of those things you've been listening to people talk about is, of course, mask mandates. Now we're talking about a vaccine mandate. And so I really want to open up the phones and get some of your thoughts about this. There is a piece that I have in front of me here in which you have the people at the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal reminding us that the pandemic in some respects will never really end, in the sense that we're always going to have the COVID virus with us. I mean, have we ever gotten rid of some of these other viruses and bacterial infections? No. And so, because as soon as you start hearing people say, well, now we have the Delta variant, that this is going to change everything, and the Pfizer vaccine, for example, maybe 10 to 30% less effective. What happens the other day? Well, you have a 2.1% drop in the stock market. And I think it's about time to recognize that we are going to, of course, always have to deal with various viruses and bacterial infections and diseases and those kinds of things. But let's at least acknowledge that we live in a world where the medical area has been able to address some of those. But now we're starting to see the drumbeat to say, well, we need to make sure that individuals who are not vaccinated become vaccinated. And you can divide that group into three groups. The first are those kids, those children under the age of 12. They, by definition, cannot take the vaccine, although Pfizer has applied for an emergency action from the FDA, hopefully by September or October, to be able to make the vaccine available to those ages 5 to 11. But the reality is that children rarely come down with a severe case of COVID-19. So in some respects, you don't hear so much about that. The second group, it's a small group, but it's one that's worth mentioning, and that is, I've done some research here in which we find that there are some people we know that are actually allergic to the vaccine because of some of the ingredients. Now, there have been all sorts of estimates on how many people that might be. It's more than 1,600. We certainly know that just by even the most conservative estimates, and those are individuals who have been told by their doctor that they cannot without having an anaphylaxis reaction. So the focus has, of course, been on those people who choose not to get the vaccine. And that has moved from, we really recommend it, to now we're going to mandate it. And even some people on one of the talking head shows the other day suggesting that if you want to avail yourself of Medicare, Medicaid, VA, something like that, that the government should prohibit you from receiving any of that kind of health care if indeed you are not vaccinated. So I'd love to know your thoughts, because indeed one of the topics we're putting on the table today is, what about these vaccine mandates? Now we're starting to see them coming down at various levels in some of the states, some of the companies, and now even the federal government. So if you'd like to join the conversation, we're going to cover a lot of other topics, but I knew this one might be on your mind. 1-800-351-1212. Your thoughts about a vaccine mandate. Would that affect you? And it's been striking to me to see the number of individuals that start some of their commentary by saying, look, I've been vaccinated. I think people should be vaccinated, but I do have a real problem mandating vaccines. And so I'd love to get some of your thoughts about that topic. And when we come back, we're going to also put a few more topics on the table. There's a lot to discuss today, and we will do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Americans seem to be of two minds when polled about the current administration and the future of this country. For example, the Harvard-Harris poll reported a very high approval rating for President Biden and his administration. On the other hand, if you dig into the specifics, you find that Americans are very concerned about some of the administration policies and the direction of this nation. Let's look at two issues that both start with the letter I. That would be immigration and inflation. The administration has tried to downplay and even ignore these issues, and the mainstream media has been willing to ignore these issues. 8 out of 10 voters say that illegal immigration is either a very serious or somewhat serious issue. Also, a large majority correctly answered that the number of monthly immigrant crossings have increased since Biden took office. It's also worth noting that voters significantly underestimated the number of new illegal immigrants coming into this country. This underestimate is probably due to the lack of media coverage of the crisis at the border. 2/3 believe that the Biden administration executive orders on immigration actually encourage illegal immigrants, and a majority also believe that the current administration should have left the Trump administration policies in place. When voters were asked about inflation, they were more concerned about it than the current administration. A significant majority said that they were either very concerned or somewhat concerned about inflation. They may not understand all the economic issues, but they can see the prices of everything increasing even while being assured that there isn't a problem. Americans may be of two minds. They are willing to give a high approval rating, but they also expect something to be done with some of these important issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Number calls coming in. And let me just do a couple of things real quickly before we take a phone call. And that is this piece that's in front of the Wall Street Journal. I think actually it puts it in some perspective. The policy goal has always been to try to minimize the impact of COVID-19 and to recognize that we wanted to prevent a complete overwhelming of the healthcare system, which is one of the justifications for everything from masks to mandates and lockdowns and the rest. But I think if you're going to be realistic, we will never be able to eradicate it. At best, we'll be able, hopefully, to manage it. And so the first issue is, what is the goal of the vaccine? Knowing full well that now we're starting to have people wonder whether or not the vaccine is going to have any kind of durability, or whether it's going to fade after 6 months, or whether we're going to have a booster and those kinds of things. There is a second issue, though, and that is now mask mandates being mandated in the federal government in places like Los Angeles and other places, which are actually mask mandates for those who are already vaccinated. So there is the mask mandate, there's the vaccine mandate, and those are some really important issues that I want to put on the table and love to get your comments about. Let me just, before we take some phone calls, mention that our first article today is by John Steele Gordon, in which he looks at this issue of censorship and in particular big tech. or the news censorship that has taken place, and use this example of how some of the real misinformation, even promoted by the media, sometimes by the president. By the way, the president was wrong when the other day he said, if you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID-19. That's wrong. Or some of the other misinformation that said, no, there's not any kind of chance that the virus came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Well, I think we pretty much know that one is wrong. And what John Steele Gordon does, for those of you that may be interested in the history of science, reminds us that when you have somebody saying science is settled, well, first of all, it's not settled, and he gives you some great examples, some of those having to do with everything from plate tectonics and paleomagnetism to the idea of what causes ulcers, gastroenterologists, and a variety of others, and even Newton's law of gravity, as well as the whole Einsteinian view of gravity and physics. And it's just a reminder in a very clear way that what oftentimes is presented as settled science, that's not what science is. 2 of my degrees are in science, and I can tell you that what is today scientific orthodoxy sometimes tomorrow gets set aside, and even reminds us that some of the most remarkable scientific revolutions, if you've ever seen The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that book, some of these came from young people who weren't set in their ways. Einstein was 26 when he published the theory of special relativity. Newton was a fellow of the Royal Society when he was 29. Lord Byron was 24 when he said he awoke one morning to find himself famous. And so that's just a reminder that when people say science is settled, they really don't understand science. And if there's one thing we've learned through this pandemic and lockdown, what today we are sure is right maybe isn't necessarily so. But I'd love to get some of your thoughts about this whole issue of the mandate and whether it's a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate. So let's go first of all to Georgia. And Wayne, we'll let you start us off this hour. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I'm a veteran and I receive VA benefits, and I served this country to earn that. And it really angers me that somebody would say that I could lose my benefits based on my not wanting to take a vaccine. And I don't. I have not taken it. But I'm an over-the-road truck driver. Last year I was in probably 45 of the continental United States, indirectly contact with people who had been in all the states, in and out of truck stops. Had 16 members of my family that I was in direct contact with test positive with it. And I've been tested, and my wife been tested probably about 8 times. We've never contacted it. Had the COVID, tested positive, so why would I be mandated to take it? And also, what do we do with HIPAA laws? Do we just throw them out the window with no congressional action or anything?
Yeah, it's just amazing how many things we are throwing out on a regular basis. Now, again, for people saying, now, where'd you come up with that? I'm pretty sure it was Margaret Hoover who made that statement. And it's around a round table here. So she's tended to be more on the conservative side, not necessarily. But then Rahm Emanuel, who definitely is on the liberal side, was saying, well, I just didn't think I'd ever find myself agreeing with somebody that would say that. And everybody around the table pretty much shaking their head. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know that it will. But the fact is that there are people that are now just frustrated with the unvaccinated, be willing to say, look, you are maybe going to cost us something. And so if you want government benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, VA, whatever it is, then we need you to show that you're vaccinated, and you need to show us your papers. And, of course, this mandate coming down in the military is part of that as well. So, first of all, I want to say thank you for your service, and thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir.
We can take a few more phone calls here. We'll move to the other end of the country, and in California. Rachel, thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes, I disagree with mandates for vaccines. I think it's a violation of our rights. And my husband also is a truck driver and was in many states, and we did not get COVID. I've been homeschooling for 27 years, and I just see our freedoms being slowly taken away.
And again, it almost seems like that is happening, doesn't it? You know, that every time we turn around, something becomes another justification for losing our freedoms. Let's go back to 2001 and 2002, and we were told at the time that because we had 9/11, well, we have to have you maybe not be expecting as much privacy. We need to be able to monitor some of the things that might be out there on social media because we want to catch the terrorists. And no one disagreed with the goal, but we began to feel a little bit uneasy about the means. And then you move now into the pandemic and lockdown. One of the other pieces that we have posted in the past was a very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson, who reminds us that if you actually look at some of the remarkably quick changes that took place in other countries and how sometimes in the French Revolution is an example, and many other places where the rights were lost within a very short period of time. He says it reminds us a little bit of what we've seen here in the United States, and always was the justification, well, we're trying to keep you safe. And first it was terrorism, now it's the pandemic. And I just want to come back to some reality of the fact that we're probably always going to have viruses. We're always going to have various kinds of infections. But it seems to me that we need to do what we can to manage those. And so that is certainly the case. Let me, if I can, maybe take one more phone call before the break, and we'll go to Georgia in Linda. Would you like to add something to our conversation today?
Oh, yes. Yeah, Kirby, I love your show. Yes, I'm totally against the mask mandates. This is just communism 101. People have got to see that. Why aren't they talking about the miracle drug ivermectin? Look up Dr. Pierre Corey out of Madison, Wisconsin, who testified in front of the Congress in May and December last year saying it's a miracle drug. It stops you from getting COVID, and if you have COVID, it, kills it in your body immediately and saved a lot of lives. They're pushing this shot because the shot is not safe. It hasn't been approved by the FDA, and these poor people that are taking it are having terrible symptoms. My own brother took it and got blood clots all on his legs. So it's really not a safe alternative. People need to ask themselves, why do they want you to take it so bad? Why do they want to force it on you? That's, again, right out of Stalin, Lenin, Hitler's playbook. And they've got to become aware and realize that the government is not your friend. That's my comment.
Well, and I think it's a good comment because it helps us understand that one of the issues I want to pick on real quickly is how could you mandate this when it's still experimental? Now, to be fair, Pfizer has tried to push forward the FDA acceptance, but these are still in the experimental stage. So is it possible, I think it's quite likely, that somewhere there's going to be at least one federal judge that's going to say you cannot mandate somebody taking an experimental drug or treatment. So possibly that will be the case. But I just wanted to put that on the table because I didn't think I'd ever hear somebody say with a straight face that we might have to deny individuals access to health care if they're not vaccinated. That doesn't sound like the United States of America, but let's open up the phones in this last half hour and see your comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour broadcasting today from Birmingham, Alabama. Tomorrow we'll be in Tuscaloosa. Not in Tuscaloosa, in Tupelo, although I want to go to Tuscaloosa, as a matter of fact. I've been down there before. We'll be in Tupelo, Mississippi with American Family Radio, but broadcasting today from WGIB Radio. And if you'd like to join us, I believe we have a full bank of phone calls, but we will do our best to get to some of those phone calls. Let me just mention before we take some more calls that I did post a very good piece on the new censorship. It is an article you might want to read. It is fascinating because it reminds us that even what we oftentimes thought were settled science is not, and well written by an individual by the name of John Steele Gordon. And then also one that I hope we'll get to today, but if not, we'll postpone some of that till tomorrow, by Robert Woodson. Robert Woodson's been on the program with us before, African-American. It's about 6 pages, really good material on a better way to fight critical race theory. If you're in one of those communities right now where this is kind of a battle and you want to know what to do, what I like about him so often is instead of criticizing evil and error, he tries to light a lamp. He tries to provide an alternative. And his 1776 Unites is one excellent program that he's put together. And it gives you some really good ideas about how to do that. So I wanted to put that article out there. We'll see, maybe we can get him on again in the future to talk about, well, what about this issue of if we're going to address racial relations in this country and we're going to address some of the issues of racial inequities, and we are rejecting the idea of critical race theory because of its Marxist origins. Okay, smart guy, what are you going to come up with? And I think this is a very good piece. Another one I wanted to get to today is drafting women. I've got a feeling that's going to generate some phone calls tomorrow. But since we have already generated more than enough phone calls talking about mask mandates and as well as vaccine mandates, let's go back to the phones, give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation today. And we'll head to South Carolina and talk to Sherry. Sherry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me?
We certainly can. What would you like to add?
Oh, as far as the vaccine mandate, I think it's a big waste of time because, and I agree with the last caller too, we need to look at these vaccines that's being put out even in the past, because we have so many kids that are affected by birth defects and other things that were adequate testing is not done. I myself and my family will not have the vaccine. It's my body, it's my choice. I have a greater power, which is the Lord Jesus Christ, that has helped me through this and my family. And I think if we all, as citizens of this great country, got back to God and putting God first, He's going to take care of us.
Sure. Sorry, we just kind of lost your connection there, but I think we got your point. And let me come back to, at least to be fair, and that is, I've said from the beginning to call what is being used right now, these mRNA vaccines, I wish we could call them something besides vaccines, because they are very different than a typical vaccine. A typical vaccine usually is where you get the virus and it's then attenuated. You kill it so it theoretically cannot reproduce. But sometimes it does, and there are some contraindications. There's all sorts of things in those. These mRNA, whatever you want to call them, but I guess we still have to call them vaccines, are different. And you can see this by the fact that now they're wondering if we need a booster, whether or not they're going to be effective for more than 6 months. I mean, when most of us got the polio vaccine, those of you that are younger got the vaccine. Some of us that are older actually took a sugar cube. We didn't have to go get a booster for it and those kinds of things. And so it almost shows how these are really different in some ways. But nevertheless, we still use the word vaccine. We've tried to cover some of that on the program. But again, Sherry's pointing out, are you going to be trusting in the Lord? Because right now, I think if you are really wanting to convince people to take the vaccine, you should be talking about the benefits. You should be encouraging them in terms of appealing to their desire to be good citizens, but instead making fun of them, telling them that they would not have access to government health care. Again, that was only one-off comment, but I got a feeling you're going to hear some more of those kinds of things coming down. I don't think that's the way to convince people, and I think as I look at all the phone calls coming in, I think most of you probably agree with that as well. Let's go, we'll stay in South Carolina for just a minute. We'll go to Ann. Ann, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello, I am calling from WJNA, maybe one of your first callers from there.
Sure, that's great. I'm glad you're calling in.
Yeah, I was wondering, like the last caller, wondering where all the liberal women are who say my body, my choice when it comes to abortion, but not about the virus. And also, real quick, that I had the virus in January, and a couple of weeks ago I was around a lot of people who got the virus at a camp, and some vaccinated and unvaccinated people got the virus, and I did not. And I guess my immune system is still doing well. So that's all I have to say.
It's very good. And you were cutting out just a little bit, but I think we got the point. And she did say, you were all the liberal women. By the way, I just want to address one more issue, and that is we have been hearing almost on a drumbeat daily basis that the people that are unvaccinated are all Trump supporters. And I think I've tried to address that before, but there are now 2 studies that have come out. One pointed out that about 61% of the individuals who are in that category of unvaccinated are not Republicans, okay? So it's Democrats and liberals. And interesting enough, one more recent study you just saw last night, that it isn't necessarily always the conservatives against vaccinations. It is oftentimes the liberals. I mean, having grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area and knowing somebody that maybe voted for Bernie Sanders and voted for example, Nancy Pelosi and shops only at Whole Foods and only eats natural, they are oftentimes the type of individual that would not be vaccinated. So we all know conservatives that don't want to be vaccinated, but we also know a lot of liberals that don't want to be vaccinated. We have a number of others that are Republican, Democrat, and independent, but the only ones you tend to hear about sometimes in the talking head shows are all those Trump supporters, because it seems like they have a desire to say something about Trump supporters than about the vaccine itself. So anyway, you made a comment that I thought I would just address real quickly, but since we have so many phone calls, let's keep the train moving down the road, and we'll go to WGIB in Georgia. Larry, what would you add to our conversation today?
Yes, sir. I think it's taking call, but I was vaccinated about March this year, and my wife is one of those high-risk people, so I went ahead and got the vaccination. I worked in the census last year before I got the vaccination, and now I'm hearing that even though I had a vaccination, I can still get COVID, and I can spread COVID. So what's the point? I mean, could I come up and say I have found a tea that's made out of rhubarb or something, and it seems to keep you from getting COVID, and because it's untested too? But hey, I've taken my precautions, so I don't.
And again, to be fair, the argument is usually that if you do get COVID, it won't be life-threatening. It won't be as severe. Probably the case. But we have an enormous number of what are called breakthrough infections, individuals that have been vaccinated who nevertheless come down with the virus again. Now, is it as significant? Maybe not. The other part of that is that, I don't know in your case, but sometimes when people say, are you vaccinated, fully vaccinated, or partially vaccinated, in most countries we put them in 3 categories. The United States concludes that if you did not get both shots, assuming you're talking about Pfizer or Moderna, that if you only got 1 shot, you're considered unvaccinated. So that's part of the problem with even the way it's being reported right now. But it does raise a good question, Larry, and that is, if nothing else, I got the vaccine so that I would be told that I would never get the virus again. And that's even what the president said the other day at a town hall meeting, but that's not the case at all. The argument, and it's the argument being given by people that are in the CDC or even by Anthony Fauci, is, well, if you get it again, then it won't be as severe. Maybe, but it does raise some really fundamental questions. And now that I think it's Pfizer is actually looking to get approved for what would be a 3rd booster that would come down, it, I think, just reminds us again that we may be with COVID-19 a lot longer than we thought. Let's take a break, though, and when we come back, full bank of phone calls. We are today in Birmingham, Alabama. Tomorrow we'll be in Tupelo, Mississippi. And if you don't get your comment in today, I think we're going to have a much more open program tomorrow so that we can cover some of those issues. Because once I start talking about the vaccine, the mandates, and whether or not we should draft women, I'm pretty sure the phones will be ringing once again. So we have all sorts of topics to put on the table, and we will take our time to get back in just a minute and take some of your phone calls. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, 1-800-351-1212. Again, in the television studio today at WGIB, and we want to thank them for their hospitality. Tomorrow we'll be in Tupelo, but let's go right back to the phones here, and we'll go first of all to North Carolina. Ross, I think you want to talk about whether this argument is a kind of a slippery slope.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for taking my call. I appreciate these discussions. It's very educational on every account. A couple of people just came on and said something similar, that here we have mandates and the government is telling you what to do, why you should do it, and everything. I think they're lacking, like you said, the ability to, if they had a good reason, they wouldn't need to have to force anybody. People would understand what they needed to do, so I think they need to do that. But the argument is, whether it's vaccinations or anything else, the current government that's in are now saying, I'm going to mandate this, and you're going to do it because I say so, which is their side. But they're the same group that would argue, just like they said, Roe versus Wade. When AIDS first came out. They said that you can't take away my personal rights to have sex, even though it was killing people. So we understand all that. And I just heard recently that they just turned down, people that are over 18 that they want to have assisted suicide because they're terminal. Well, I'm going to take away your rights, but I'm going to force other rights on you, and everything is about not having your rights anymore at all, either way you look at it. So those are my points.
Very good thoughts. And again, one of the things I've tried to help us understand is that we need to be able to make compelling arguments. I mean, first of all, we want to, as Christians, be able to stand with the Bible and biblical ideas. And if you can make an argument from biblical scripture and scriptural points, that should be sufficient for Christians. But out in the workaday world, out in the secular world, we need to use common sense arguments, and that is going to be important. But instead, when the force is always, you have to do this because we're the government and we know better, okay, you're going to have to convince me a lot more than just trying to force me. And then when you're using not so much a carrot but a stick, which is saying, I would deny you certain health care benefits because you have demonstrated to me that you're irresponsible by not taking a vaccine. Is that the way to convince people that they need to do something? And I think we all know that, of course, you have to do that with your kids. But if you try to do that with adults, that doesn't usually work very well. And so you've got some really good points here. But I'm going to keep going, and let's, if we can, go to the state of Texas now. Lorelda, thank you for calling today.
Thank you, brother. I'm glad y'all are there. I want to be very real.
Yes, okay.
They keep talking about a mandate. I also heard it was an act of love. So let's get real and not make it political, but let's do what the good Lord said, to love God and to love others.
And again, that's one of the arguments that was used, I think, when we had Curtis Chang on, that we have some responsibility there. And I think I want to do anything I can to help individuals, but at the same time, if you have some medical questions about a mask, a mandate, lockdowns, viruses, vaccines, those deserve some scientific evaluation as well. So again, let's recognize that we should always be as gracious and humble as we can, and certainly want to not only love God, but love our neighbor. But at the same time, I think I hear some people asking some fundamental questions about the science and the medicine, and that kind of brings me to the piece that we've talked about today. It's the first article, The New Censorship, in which we hear these phrases all the time, settled science. We're starting to find out sometimes things aren't as settled as you might think. Going back to the phones real quickly, we'll go to South Carolina. Marilyn, thank you for joining our conversation today. What would you like to add?
Well, just from a medical point of view, I think this COVID is just a different type of flu, and it's going to be with us forever now, and have to have a flu shot every year, and it should be something people can choose to do. And the CDC at one time said the mask did not stop the virus. The virus was too small. It went through the mask. So those are kind of not compatible. And also, as to be taking the shot or not, it's our right. We have the privacy to be treated however we want to medically. It's not the government's right. And also, the Bible tells us in Revelations, it sounds like you're not going to be able to buy or sell or get the needs we need if we don't be vaccinated. And that sounds like Revelation's beginning.
Again, a couple of key issues. First of all, when we talk about the COVID-19, we are talking about something that is much more lethal than the typical flu. So that would be one that I'd want to set aside. The argument being made right now is that we have what is called the Delta variant. By the way, that's not the only one, but I'll just focus on that one for just a minute, which seems to be, if indeed we can trust the science, and you can see how I always tend to put an if in some of this, but if we can trust the science, seems to be about twice as transmittable as originally COVID-19. And what that means is that if you look at some of the studies that came out of Australia, it seems that sometimes when you even had a fleeting contact with an individual, you could take that. So there have been examples in the past where a virus, as it mutates, sometimes becomes less lethal, but more easily transmissible. And so that seems to be one of the questions that people have asked about that. And now the argument is that now we're seeing another bump. That is, the number of COVID cases have approximately tripled in a month. And so states that had originally lifted their restrictions are now thinking about trying to return to some of those restrictions. And of course, you have questions about whether or not you can travel overseas. So all of those are really important issues. And the other one on the table, which I mentioned just in passing, but it's worth thinking about, we have a number of different vaccines, but let me focus on the Pfizer vaccine for just a minute. The estimates coming down so far seem to suggest that the Pfizer vaccine is anywhere from 10% less effective to maybe even 30% less effective on this new Delta variant. So that is being used as a justification for trying to lock down parts of the country once again. And yet, as I think you said, Marilyn, only so well, we've been with these various microbes for a long time, and we will continue to be with viruses and bacteria and others. And so I think what we need to do is have policy that focuses on trying to minimize the possible impact it has on society, minimize the impact it might have on the healthcare system. But I think it is naive and very utopian to think we'll ever get rid of it. And we're starting to find that maybe the hope that these vaccines would be completely able to rid ourselves of that, a promise which sort of is at least subliminally being made in the past, at least by the Biden administration, isn't necessarily going to work out. Well, that's all we have for today. You're going to find a lot of great articles that we've posted on the website. We didn't get to all of them today, but I did want to hear some of your comments about the mandates. And tomorrow we'll be broadcasting from Tupelo, Mississippi at the American Family Association, and we'll be broadcasting on American Family Radio. Appreciate so many of you calling in from all over the country. If we didn't get your phone call today, you know what, we'll try to get to it tomorrow. We look forward to our opportunity broadcast, and we'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.